Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ben Gwilliam. He's a private land forest inventory analyst with the Ontario Woodlot Association. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm excellent, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's truly an honor and privilege to be on your podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Love that you're able to make some time. So I'm going to ask you a question about vertical datums and how you actually go about doing it. So we're chuckling right now. Before the podcast, Ben was like, "Don't ask me anything like super technical," and I said, "I promise I won't." And then I just asked him one, but so this is more just to lighten the mood. So Ben, where are we reaching you today?
So I'm at my home here in Toronto, Ontario. This is where I work out of mostly when I'm doing my data processing, but I spend a lot of my time out in the field all across the province. So normally you could find me anywhere out in the field, but right now today I am at home.
Yeah, so when I look at the Ontario Woodlot Association map, but like this is Ontario, and for the listeners that don't know Ontario, Ontario is massive as a province. So like you must have a lot of driving, or is it the Ontario Woodlot Association private corporate jet or corporate helicopter that whisks you around, or how much driving do you have to do?
It's quite a bit of driving. Our chapters are mostly located in the south of the province. So, if you know where Algonquin Park is, it's generally a little bit north of that and everything south. So, the driving, they have a very generous mileage compensation policy, but it's just with my own car that I'm getting around.
Yeah, absolutely. So Algonquin Park there in South. So not too bad. We won't judge you for being living in Toronto or using Toronto as a home base. So this is part two in a series with the Ontario Woodlot Association. I spoke with John Pino, executive director, on a previous podcast. John largely said, "Hey, if you have technical questions, don't ask me. Ask Ben." And then so we'll get into the weeds, but certainly we won't go pure tech. I'm excited about having this conversation with you because you are a guy boots on the ground, doing hands-on work. And I think of our listeners and our viewers, for those on YouTube, I think they're really going to benefit or be able to relate to maybe some of your experiences, maybe some of the challenges you're facing, or even where you're going and how to actually go about doing that. So maybe to start things off, tell me about your journey. I believe you got a forestry background, but maybe kind of for our listeners and viewers, kind of give us, how did you get into where you are now? Was this ordained or predestined, fate took over, or is this like a kind of a little bit of organic growth, a bit of studies? But maybe give us some background about who you are and how you got into this world of forestry.
Well, certainly, Kevin. Yeah, after dropping out of the computer science program, I felt I really needed a change, but I still wanted a university degree. And spending time around the Faculty of Forestry, I had no idea what forest management entailed. Really, I just knew that I wanted to be outside. I wanted to be around nature. I wanted to contribute somewhat to the challenges that the world's facing with loss of biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and all the other aspects that forest management provides. So I ended up re-enrolling into University of Toronto in their undergraduate forestry program, which wasn't an actual faculty at the time. It was under the arts and science program. And I ended up really enjoying the program itself. And I graduated with a Bachelor of Science and went on to enroll in the Masters of Forest Conservation program as well, where I was able to apply a lot of what I was learning in my computer science background, integrating it, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today, into the forest management background that I was learning.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. It's kind of funny. A lot of the digital foresters, as I call it, the ones that end up doing work that you're doing now, there's a weird thread that many of us had a touch with computer science or engineering, and it didn't seem to satisfy a calling. Maybe that's one way of putting it. And folks ended up coming to forestry or maybe environmental sciences. I personally went the environmental sciences route and not the forestry side. So it's neat to draw that correlation there. Was doing the master something that was like a logical progression, or was there something more in the sense that when you studied undergrad, you found your calling, if that's the right thing, your interest was peaked, your passion fired up? Was that something that you just thought, I want to learn more as a stepping stone? And if so, I know in Canada, at least, there's only so many universities with forestry faculties, and there's almost a where did you go to school? And then there's a bit of banter. You stayed at U of T, and so maybe tell us about that in terms of that decision to go do the master's versus going straight right out to work in the forest industry.
Certainly. Well, I had a strong connection with the faculty there. I had a supervisor in my undergraduate program who really encouraged me to take the MFC, the Masters of Forest Conservation. And I also, one of my long-term goals is to gain my RPF. And since that program is accredited, it goes towards that goal. I was able to acquire substantial grants, and it just made sense for me to stay in the city. This is where my wife is. She also works at U of T. So the location itself was just more so out of convenience and connection, right? Then I could have gone on to a university further north and probably got a little more into the weeds with forest management, but I really enjoyed being at U of T, and the MFC program having a focus more so on biodiversity, I think kind of spoke to my values as well.
Yeah, for sure. So as we kind of look at the journey, right? You did your undergrad, you were writing, as a young guy, your own batch scripts and all that, even before university, and that's what led you to maybe look at computer science first, and then decide that, I'm dropping out. It's not the right time. It's not the right fit, and truthfully, that's okay. I think there's a stigma. You hear dropping out, and that's bad. Sometimes you just need to find your way, right? And you want to make sure you get it right. And it certainly sounds like you've done that. And so when we look at where you are now, I'm curious, like, did you know John? I don't know technically, is he your boss or the executive director, but did you know John Pino beforehand, or was there one of those moments, magical moments where sparks collided and then this is where we are now? But maybe tell me about how you came to be at the Ontario Woodlot Association.
Certainly. Well, no, I didn't know John Pinot personally before. It was through an internship opportunity, part of the MFC program. There's a strong internship component, about 4 months you spend with another organization, and you get to pick from a list of internship opportunities. And one that really stuck out to me was lidar data to develop forest inventories on private land. And I was aware of lidar data before. I remember scrolling the internet, seeing a really cool picture, of what it was a profile of a forest canopy, all colorized by point return. And I looked into it more, and I saw the applications for lidar in autonomous vehicles and forest mapping. So when I saw that internship option pop up, I immediately applied to it, and I was so gracious to be accepted. And it's been truly an honor working for the Ontario Woodlot Association. Afterwards, they liked my internship uh, product so much that they decided to hire me on full time.
Yeah, nice for sure. And so how long have you been with the OWA to date?
So that was 2021. So it's been a little over, I guess, almost 2 years now that I've been with the OWA.
Right. So you're going right in, like, good old COVID style, COVID era rolling in. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
often with COVID, I joke with forestry, it's like, you're out in the woods with one or two people. Like it's arguably, a great profession not being during COVID. Self-isolation is well,
exactly.
foresters being in the bush. Send me out to the bush or the fields. So you discovered lidar and you're learning, so maybe tell us about the work you do at the OWA, because again, when I spoke with John was talking more about the program, his experiences in his life and how he got to be. But in terms of the OWA, is there a specific set of things you're responsible for, or is it more ad hoc project based on what the membership needs? But what's a day in the life as a private land forest inventory analyst with the OWA?
Certainly. So my purview is the private land inventory project, which I believe John described in the last episode there. He, well, basically, beyond that, I do also geospatial analyst, so geospatial analysis for very small projects that the OWA has taken on. But with my involvement in the private land forest inventory project, I do, along with my colleague Sinead Eggett, our field coordinator, I do all of the field work for all of the ground calibration plots. So I'm collecting the data, and I also bring it back to my office, and I do the processing of the data to develop the actual inventory maps.
Right. So for those maybe fresher listeners who may not have caught John's piece, maybe describe this OWA project of the inventory as a whole and what you're trying to do.
So a forest inventory really hasn't been done on private land in Ontario since 1979. That was the last time that the full area of Ontario that was inventoried. Since then, the ministry has pulled back a lot of the funding and is focusing primarily on Crown land, which is where a lot of the the industrial forestry happens in Ontario. Crown land is essentially public land. So private land was sort of left to be unaccounted for almost 40 years. And through John's visionary, through John's vision and along with Al Stinson, they thought, why don't we apply what the MNRF is doing in the north and on the Crown land using lidar data to produce accurate and up-to-date maps of forest structure? Why don't we apply that on private land and see how it works? So my internship was documenting an area in the far east of the province, the United Counties of Prescott and Russell. They had flown lidar data for floodplain mapping. And this lidar data existed, but they basically only use the ground returns. We thought, what if we use the returns that they weren't using, the vegetation, and produce the same sort of inventories that the MNRF is doing? So that is essentially the basis of the project. In the north, in the Crown land, the ministry does fly over private land as well, because it's sort of interspersed within the Crown land areas. And what we're doing there is we rely on the MNRF to do all of the processing, and we can clip out the private land afterwards and add it to our own database.
So prior to doing this, like in your master's degree and your undergrad, like this is not something you knew how to do coming out of school. Is that correct?
No, absolutely not. And I owe so much to the venerable Murray Woods, who took me under his wing and taught me all that he knows about processing lidar data into forest inventories. And it's based a lot on the work you have done as well, Kevin, and your colleagues in that whole cohort. And it's building a lot on the work that Murray, yourself, and Dr. Pitt and Dr. Penner and everyone else has done. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe because there's people out there that while we talk about lidar, some of us talk about it as if it's an everyday thing, and yet there's people out there who still haven't started their journey in adopting and using lidar in their day-to-day business, whether it's commercial forestry or some nonprofit organization. So maybe what was your initial reaction like when you started doing your internship and you got into this with the data? Was it holy bleep, run for the high hills, what did I sign up for? Or was it okay, holy double bleep, definitely run for the high? But maybe share that initial response to like looking at this, like was it just natural that, because again with your technical background and curiosity and the computer sciences side of it, that you felt well equipped? But what was that like the first couple of days of starting that project?
It was overwhelming, to say the least. I am so grateful that I had a background in coding Python, because that translated well into the R programming language that is used predominantly to process this lidar data. So I understood the coding aspect of it. What I wasn't prepared for were the size of the data sets. I'd never worked with data at that scale, right? So these data sets were hundreds of gigabytes in size, creating tables with millions and millions and millions of rows, and crunching those kind of numbers on my machine. It was a struggle. I had to upgrade quite a bit of my hardware in order to be able to do it. But I had such great guidance from Murray Woods. There's a lot of documentation online that I was able to access. There's great work coming out of Laval University. It was just it was helpful to have all of that. It required a lot of research on my part, but if I didn't have uh, these mentors, I certainly wouldn't be where I am today. That's for certain. It was a lot. It was a lot of
Head banging.
yes, exactly, exactly,
And you need to persevere to get through it. We joke about it, but sometimes that's what it is. I recall an old professor that told me when I ran into his room frustrated, and he's like, you're what's wrong? You're banging your head against the wall." And I was like, "Absolutely." And he's like, "That's a good thing, because if you weren't, then it probably means somebody else has already done this and solved the problem." And I was like,
exactly.
"Okay, that's one way of putting it." Got me out of the room pretty quick. But so for this initial project, for our listeners, like, how big was this project area? And you mentioned lidar. I assume it's airborne lidar. You talk about large volume data. What was the point density? Give me a bit more nuts and bolts, so our listeners can relate to maybe their projects that they've had to work with.
Certainly. So the LiDAR data we use is all publicly accessible. It is mostly flown in leaf-off conditions. So basically, a lot of the LiDAR that's flown on Crown land is flown in leaf-on conditions. So you're getting a really good picture of the tree canopy because it's reflecting off of the leaves. Unfortunately, a lot of the municipalities and conservation agencies will only fly in leaf-off because they're only interested in what the terrain looks like. And that was a bit of a challenge when we're producing our own inventories on private land where these LiDAR acquisitions were flown. It's all flown with linear mode LiDAR. It's all flown around, what I see is between 6 to 20 points per square meter returns. And from that, like I said, the challenge was that it's leaf off LiDAR. So we're getting really good tree heights, but I find overall, especially in broadleaf species, we tend to underpredict their values because it's only bouncing off of the stems rather than the leaf area. For conifers, of course, that's not really a concern. And we're predicting the attributes for conifers quite well. But the main challenge and the difference has been the leaf off conditions that this LiDAR data was flown. And unfortunately, due to the costs associated with this, we can't fly our own LiDAR. The OWA is too small of an organization. We certainly don't have the funding for something like that. It would be lovely if we could, but we have to work with what's available in the public and what's already being flown.
For sure. So that project you mentioned, United Counties of Prescott Russell, I think is what you said. That was the internship. So the data was in leaf off conditions. So obviously that internship turned into a job. So I'm going to assume that the project was successful. And even though the data was flown in leaf off conditions, you're able to achieve your goals and what you're trying to predict. Is that accurate? And maybe if that is accurate, doesn't matter whether it's leaf on, leaf off. What did you guys find?
So what we found was overall the predictions were respectable. Certainly when you are looking at the stand level, right? If we're looking at a pixel by pixel basis, there's quite a bit of error. When we average things out to a stand, which is typically how forests are managed at the stand level, we find that even in the leaf off conditions, our root mean squared error is about 12%, which is excellent. Um, Root mean squared error just means the average error of the predicted values to the observed values. So being within 12% of the actual value is, from what I understand, is in line with what they are getting up in the north on crown land, even in leaf on conditions. If you were to separate that into the broadleaf stands, I believe that root mean squared error goes up to close to 20%. But when we include conifer with that as well, we're sitting at a pretty comfortable percentage there.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned you're the boots on the ground guy in your role. You're doing the field work. So again, assuming that project was successful, you get hired on with the Ontario Woodlot Association. Your boots on the ground. You mentioned the OWA. doesn't have the resources to fly that type of lidar. So for the private land base, are you acquiring the data yourselves using drones and lidar, or where is that data coming from, or is it purely from the province and cookie cutting out the pieces there?
So it's purely from the province. Ontario GeoHub has hosted all of the publicly available LiDAR data sets that have been flown to date. In a smaller area, we're sort of experimenting with the use of drone technology and digital photogrammetry to produce point clouds. And that's something that's still very much in the testing phases for the OWA. And our goal is to be able to fly our drones over a smaller area, acquire a point cloud just for their woodlot, and be able to produce a usable inventory from that. And this would be in areas where either the LiDAR data is out of date. So we like to look for LiDAR data that's within 5 years of us doing our ground calibrations, no more than that, because at that point, the forest has grown too much beyond from when the LiDAR was acquired and we're doing our ground calibrations. So we would like to be able to just fly our own drones over small woodlots and produce boutique inventories for landowners that way.
For sure. And so you mentioned you go out of the field. So I'm sure there's listeners who are saying, Ben, I love what I'm hearing. You know, I'm in a similar situation. I've got some LiDAR data that came from somewhere, or whatever the story is. And I know I gotta put plots down on the ground. I know you've been asked this a million times. How many plots do I need? And how big are they? What am I measuring? What would you tell the digital foresters tuning into this podcast?
Well, the amount of plots you need certainly depends on both the size of the area that you'd like to inventory and the amount of variation in forest structures you have within that area. So to give some context, for Prescott and Russell, an area about 2,000 kilometers squared, we ended up with close to 200 plots. And what these plots are capturing is the full variation in forest structure across that particular landscape. So the way that we process the LiDAR using machine learning, it only knows to predict something that it has seen before. So it's only going to be as good as we're able to capture that full variation. So these plots, the plots that we're using right now, and this area that we've inventoried is the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Forest, which certainly has more variation than the boreal, but not as much as the Carolinian forests further south in the province. We do 400 square meter plots. And within those plots, we measure the height and diameter of all trees, their quality, AGS, UGS, acceptable growing stock or unacceptable growing stock, and as well as their species. And that is able to translate into a raster, a map with about 20 by 20 meter grid cells. And each grid cell is predicting the values for basal areas, volumes, average heights, average diameters, anything you would see in a standard industrial inventory on the crown land areas. That's what we're producing for private land in the south.
Very cool.
If we were to move, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, if we move further south into these Carolinian areas, we're seeing a lot more variation in species and forest structure. And because of that, we're expanding our plot size now. So we expand it to about 625 meters squared. And that way we're able to capture more of that variation, more of those species. And that would translate into a raster inventory with a grid cell of about 25 by 25 meters squared.
Right. And so I've got my smartphone and we always get to go out and use our GPS. Am I taking my smartphone out there to measure these plots, or are you using some more fancy technology?
Absolutely not. And Murray spoke to this well in his episode. The most important part of doing your calibration plots is spatially locating those plots, right? So we use sub-meter GPS units. Right now we're using arrow units, and they provide to within about 0.1 of a meter our actual location on the ground. For a recreational GPS unit, you could be anywhere from 10 to 30 meters of your actual location. What we have to do is establish our plot center with these sub-meter GPS units and we have to let them run for about an hour. And they're using, I believe it's 3 or 4 satellite networks. They use the Russian satellite network, GLONASS, I believe it's called. They use the Chinese satellite network, Baidu. They use the American networks and the European networks. So you're looking at about 40 to 100 satellites all at once triangulating your position. And you have to wait for those satellites to pass over top of you. So you have to sit there for, close to 45 minutes to an hour in your plot to ensure that your plot center is within, centimeters of its actual location.
For sure, for sure. And so you had mentioned earlier, Python, that's a common thing that pretty much anyone dealing with data and data science, like unless you're a purist software developer who would argue something more like a Java or C# or something. For the most part, like what's taught in university is Python, and you mentioned R. But maybe for our listeners who themselves are dabbling or who are experts doing this and have their own toolkit, maybe refresh us in terms of what the state of the art is for tools and what you used. You had mentioned R, and I assume there's probably a couple of libraries you use, but what's the standard then Gwilliam data processing toolkit recipe that you can share with the world?
So R is the main environment that I'm in, and it's the lidar package that I primarily use to do the area-based inventories. So we're doing an area-based approach to our inventories. And the lidar package is the full tool set for developing these inventories from. And that is it's an open source library from the university, Laval University in Quebec. I believe Jean Romain is the primary individual responsible for that. And all of the tools in there can take you from your raw lidar point cloud straight through to your produced raster maps. And from there, I then pull it into ArcGIS Pro, where I do a lot of the geospatial work, just so I can, I have a good visual representation in front of me so I can see what's going on. The R environment is just purely, it's all coding. You can plot your graphs, but I much prefer bringing it into ArcGIS Pro to do the final steps.
For sure. And for your rig or your computer setup, maybe describe to us, you got a overclocked CPU, thermo cooled enclosure that shines lights as if it's a streetcar racer. What are you using for your day-to-day processing?
Right. So I think the most important aspects you should have on your machine, you should have multiple cores. So I'm using a Ryzen, and it has, I believe, 24 cores on it, 12 with 24 processors. And then I have a large amount of RAM. Anyone who wants to do LiDAR processing at home, you have to max out your RAM. I'm at about 128 gigabytes of RAM, and I find that still not enough. Sometimes I have to cut a data set. It's just the way that lidar works. It'll pull everything into the space all at once, and it puts it on your memory all as one chunk. So you have to have at least the size of the rasters that are being produced. You have to have that much memory. If you're running a machine with your standard amount of memory of 32, 64 gigabytes, I guess that's what's being sold today, it simply isn't enough. If I could have more, I would put in more, but I think I'm using up all the slots I have on my motherboard.
Yeah, I probably date myself by saying this, but I feel like this is like a Tim the Toolman Taylor chuckle where he does his anyhow, that's probably dating me. Some people are like Tim the Toolman Taylor, but it was a sitcom and he would have his chuckle there. So very cool. So now I'm curious to, as we continue talking, obviously a technical expert, you've created many of these things. Your boots on the ground, scrambling around, collecting plots and doing those measurements. But maybe from the end user's perspective, because when we think about whether it's Ontario Woodlot or commercial forestry clients and whatnot, some people either embrace the technology and the information products that are produced right away, or some are maybe a little bit leery, and some are just like, this is how we've always done it. Why would we change? But for Ontario Woodlot Association members, like how has the reception been to the enhanced forest inventory products that you're producing for them?
I've been quite impressed with how positive the reception has been. Our members are so enthusiastic about their own woodlots and improving the health of their woodlots or understanding more about their woodlots. And for us to be able to provide not so much, the basal areas and the volumes and what they would use for commercial forestry, but we can also provide the above ground biomass, for instance, which can give them their carbon storage on their woodlot. We're working on providing wildlife metrics. So we're looking at different point densities, relating them to specific tree species, and how does that relate into now habitat for certain bird species that would prefer a very dense canopy of a certain type of tree, or for instance, wintering yards for deer in hemlock stands that have a dense understory. And we're working to translate our lidar products into specifically the carbon and the wildlife, which I find is what our members are most interested in. Of course, we do have members who produce wood products from their woodlots, and they, of course, are very interested in that other component, the basal areas, the volumes. But overall, it's been quite positive, and there's been quite a bit of, on our part, making this accessible for them and making it open source for them. So ensuring that they have access to open source tools that they can look at this data with. So, we rely, while I use ArcGIS Pro myself, I translate all this into, ways that they can use QGIS on their own machines to interpret this data. And eventually we're going to have on our portal a way for a member to give us their address for their woodlot, and we can basically produce a la carte products for them if they're not able to do this analysis on their own. That's further on down the road, of course. But overall, I think it's been quite positive, the reception, even though it's highly technical, and I see the eyes glaze over once in a while when I'm explaining it. But when they see the images and they see what they're able to understand now about their woodlot in that type of detail, they're all on board.
Yeah, I find that amazing that you're able to take folks that, passionate about their land, who probably haven't used GIS tools before, and yet they're able to adopt QGIS and figure out how to do that. But the flip side of the coin is, as digital foresters, I've discovered foresters are great problem solvers. It's built into their DNA, and they know their business better than anybody else. And with the right toolkit, they can figure it out, to achieve the goals that they want. So that's very cool. What's the funniest field story that you can share with our audience? Your boots on the ground. There's got to be bear chasing me for I did my half marathon training because a bear chased me, or I had to swim through things I didn't want to swim through. But is there a funny story that just sticks with your mind from doing work for the OWA?
It's probably spending a field day, and within the first 15 minutes of getting out of the car, I fall down, I get covered in mud and water, and I have to spend the rest of the day just miserably soaked and dirty. To be honest, I'm quite grateful that there hasn't been a lot of unexpected things happening out in the field yet, but I hope I have some better stories for you soon, because if anything, we really do. We run into a lot of dynamic scenarios out there, right? The LiDAR's telling us to go sample a plot, and it doesn't care whether that plot is in an alder swamp or it's in a nice cushy pine plantation. We have to get out there and get to it. So yeah, it's certainly a challenge, and it leads to some unique experiences. But thankfully, nothing too serious has happened to me yet.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. So nowadays, all the rage is individual tree inventories. You had mentioned area-based approach, pixel-based enhanced inventories, but there's still a lot of excitement over individual tree inventories. What's your view on it? Is it still hype being blown up, or are we at that golden age where we can do individual tree inventories accurately and precisely and consistently? What are your thoughts?
Well, from my experience, I think in these large areas, it's quite a challenge being able to accurately reproduce the characteristics for each individual tree. I don't think we're there yet. I know the ministry is working hard on, and that's the direction things will eventually go. We did recently wrap up a project for the municipality of Oakville, and we did essentially what was a tree inventory using their lidar data, and we were able to do an individual tree inventory from that. And in that application, it worked very well because these trees were singular. Um, they were spaced apart. The lidar was able to, segment these trees very well, and we could use multispectral imagery to apply a species layer to it. And we were quite successful with an individual tree inventory in that urban setting. Outside of that, and these large land base, and certainly in the south with all of the variation in Carolinian species, I really see an individual tree inventory being a huge challenge, but not unsurmountable. Certainly not with advances in computer technology. A big thing is the processing is just insane to process all of that into individual trees. And my computer at this point can't handle something like that even. So I think certainly with cloud applications, that'll be achievable. But right now, the area based is really the gold standard for inventories.
For sure, for sure. So thinking as a trained forester, despite the technical background and then getting into the weeds, using technology, obviously learning things, persevering, fighting through walls, and ultimately realizing success, and then doing continued projects for the OWA. Looking forward, are there certain technologies or themes or threads or something that you're keeping your eye on based on your area of expertise with lidar and inventories now? Is there something that you're just like, gets you excited, or you're just kind of on the side of the table, just like something's there, I'm just going to keep an eye? I'm not sure how I'm going to use it in my day to day, but it's something that I'm really excited about and curious. Is there something there on the technology side that you're excited about and you think other digital foresters should be as well?
Certainly. For me, the terrestrial lidar is something that is going to be such a powerful tool, certainly for doing our calibration plots. I've had my hands on a GeoSlam unit, which is a handheld terrestrial lidar unit. Essentially, it's the lidar sensor is right in front of you rather than being flown from an airplane, and you can walk with the unit through a stand or through a plot, and it's mapping that plot, collecting millions and millions and millions of points, providing such a dense point cloud that you're able to get diameters from the trees rather than predicting diameter from the forest structure from above. You're getting the actual diameter of the tree. And for us to be able to do a calibration plot using a terrestrial lidar unit, we could do it in 20 minutes, maybe less, rather than spending the hour and a half that we are in the plot. We can just walk out there with the terrestrial lidar unit, scan it, move on to the next plot, and do all of our processing back at the office. That, and I believe just the open source data that's coming online with the satellite sensors that are being launched. For instance, the Jetty satellite sensor, the spaceborne lidar. I find that amazing, and I find it amazing that we're able to access that for free. For the Sentinel-2 imagery, we can do such excellent time series analysis. We can take images from the spring, from the fall, from the winter, and we can do such good species mapping, and it's all free. It's all open source and available to the public.
Very cool. So if I was to take my my marker and on the screen color it a little bit of gray into your beard, into your hair, and then now I say you're Professor Ben Gwilliam now. Yeah, there's some there already, but now you're Professor Ben Gwilliam. You're in charge of the University of Toronto forestry program. What course, what would the course be called, and what would you teach in it, knowing that these are skills that any forester should have? So what would the course be called, and what would the curriculum look like to ensure that foresters were coming out with what they needed to succeed in the world?
Certainly. I think it would be a core course on lidar data. I think this is becoming, and it already has become, such a fundamental aspect of how we are conducting forest management. And I really think there isn't enough of an emphasis. Certainly the MFC program has about a half credit for our GIS. So our geographic information systems course was only 3 or 4 months long. Wasn't enough for the amount of GIS that is actually used in forest management, being able to interpret maps, being able to do analysis on these maps. So I think there would be a very much a strong focus on using lidar data and interpreting that in GIS systems, which I don't think there's quite enough of right now, at least not from my experience.
For sure, for sure. And so when we think about the Ontario Woodlot Association, your work, you're doing this stuff. What's the future look like? What John Pino gives you the keys to the association. I know that's not how it works, but now you are the new John Pino. Where would you like to see the OWA invest its efforts in terms of the work you're doing, or is there something else that you've seen working with the OWA that, when we think about connecting dots, is there a logical connector to some other initiatives that would really benefit the Ontario Woodlot Association membership?
I think moving towards leveraging these open source data sets to provide a la carte mapping for our members for their specific woodlot areas, moving towards working closely with municipalities and producing individual tree inventories with their lidar data, and then reusing the new acquisitions, because it's becoming more and more frequent that the lidar data is being captured. You're looking at every 5 years, in some cases more like 10 years. Then we can develop growth models for these areas, these smaller areas, these towns, these cities, these woodlots, and being able to provide this data online, because we are a nonprofit, and this project is publicly funded. This data will be publicly available, and having a portal where people can just circle their area on a map, a Google Maps type platform, and it spits out all of the inventory attributes for them. And if there's multiple acquisitions, then we can do even deeper analysis to see how is their forest changing, in terms of health, etc. So yeah, I think moving towards that, working closely with landowners and municipalities, and helping them leverage this data that's sitting there open source, and providing them with that is certainly the way that things should go.
For sure. So I always love asking this question, and I know a lot of people chuckle when I ask it, but and it's only applicable maybe not to everyone, but for some people. But if Ben Gwilliam was to look back on a younger version of Ben Gwilliam again, signed up for computer science and then dropped out because it wasn't the right calling or the right fit, found forestry by default, maybe because of the atrium with the natural trees in them that provided the inspiration. But if you're to look back, was there a point in time that, if you were to go back and give yourself a piece of advice to maybe adjust your path in a certain direction, or maybe move you further or quicker down the path you took? Is there one piece of advice that you would give yourself or other young foresters studying now and looking and aspiring to join the workforce? Is there a pro tip you would give them?
I think I would ask more questions. I would develop stronger connections with my mentors. I would ask more questions of the experts in the field, and really leverage these connections for my own interests, really. So it would be like just to stay curious and stay up to date with all these developments. It's happening at such a rapid pace that you have to be checking every few weeks, every few months, to see what new papers are coming out and who has done what and how could you use that for your own applications. So just to stay curious, ask questions. Do not be afraid to really pester some of these professors and mentors. They love talking about and sharing their knowledge, right? So some of them don't do it willingly, right? So I would definitely say be more proactive in that sense.
Yeah, that's a great pro tip, and it makes me laugh because there's a saying: until someone actually says no, then you should keep asking the questions or keep pestering, as you say. So as we look to wind down, Ben, I've enjoyed the conversation. I've enjoyed learning what you do. Like you and I had not met before, and so super cool to learn your journey and the work that you did for the OWA. But I'm assuming that a lot of this work you've done is transferable to other jurisdictions, whether it's land in general or maybe even other places like in the US where private land is more the norm versus in Canada a lot of crown land or really any other international jurisdiction. So if folks want to get a hold of you to say, hey, I want to pick your brain, learn more, or maybe use you as a sounding board, or maybe even create some other partnerships or who knows what that is. What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Certainly. So I'd encourage anyone to visit the OntarioWoodlot.com website to check out our organization. And from there, you can find my contact information. It's b.gwilliam at OntarioWoodlot.com. That's b.gwilliam. And I really enjoy sharing the things that I've learned because it wasn't so long ago that I was first starting out and overwhelmed, and I still am quite a newbie. But I think that gives me a sort of unique perspective that I can translate a lot of what I learned without getting too much in the weeds for people. And it helps people who are also new to understand how they can take their raw point cloud, which likely exists if they're in Ontario, it's all been flown, and translate into something usable that's similar to what we're doing here at the Ontario Woodlot.
Yeah, it's funny you say it's easy. What's easy to one is likely hard for the other. For us, it's easy because you've spent 10,000 hours making it easy, and so that's where often, as you said, networking, speaking with the peers, the community. It's Vorsters like to share and share openly and help where possible. So Ben, I enjoyed the conversation a lot. Really love learning your journey, love learning the work that you're actually doing and you're thinking on where to go next. I think a lot of our listeners and viewers will be able to relate to your journey in terms of trying to start and where to go. We talked about various tools that you're using now that largely for the most part, aside from maybe the ArcGIS side for the visualization, these are open source tools that anyone could pick up. But just back to our comment, what is easy to you was probably not easy on day one. And sounds like you're open to talking with people and sharing your experiences. So people who are listening, watching, feel free to reach out to Ben at the Ontario Woodlot Association. So, hey, man, really enjoyed the conversation. Hope you had some fun in this conversation with this guy. And we'll look forward to maybe connecting in person in the not so far future. But thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It was really an honor to be here today.